Memes is asking, if one had the opportunity and means to pursue a completely different avenue in life, even though it's not one's formal field of study, thoughts on big life changes like that. My observation of people is those things tend to work really well. If you want to do that next thing, you have real motivation and energy for it, even though it's not at all what you've been doing before. It's my observation is people more often than not really thrive in that situation. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have done a bunch of different things, different projects. I've maintained for the last 35 years at least the same sort of overall matrix of a company in which I'm doing these things, but the actual things I've done have been rather different at different times. And I would say that in general, that's if the things one is motivated to do are sort of the things one should do. And just because one says, well, I've gotten really good at doing this, and therefore I have to keep doing it, and I can't do anything else, is usually kind of a bad idea. Now, having said that, often when you make the jump to the other thing, turns out all that experience that you had on the thing before will actually play, often in ways that you never expected, into the thing that you then do next. I've noticed this between doing science and technology and so on, that even though I thought, like our physics project, I thought there are going to be no applications of this to anything practical for 200 years. But it turns out that's wrong. And because, one's able to see applications in the very short term. And I think, if you switch from doing, one kind of occupation to something completely different, I think you will find that the trailing experience that you have from your previous occupation will turn out to be valuable. And sometimes I think that's the place where you kind of have an unfair advantage relative to everybody else who's doing X. So, for example, lots of things that I and other people I know have been involved with, that where there's an area of which has never been made computational before, and yet one has all this experience, let's say, in doing computational kinds of things, but then one's like, well, let's go to this area that I've never sort of touched before or whatever, and where people are doing it in a certain way. But now from the previous stuff that I've done, I get to bring in all this knowledge that people haven't really applied in that area, and you have kind of this unfair advantage. So I think when you think about kind of the big life change, if you're motivated to make that jump to the greener grass, so to speak, assuming it does turn out to be greener on the other side of the fence, so to speak, it is important to remember that from if you have a large experience base from before, you will be able to use that to do perhaps different and perhaps better things than you could before. Now, it's also the case that, we see this with people at our company all the time. People, work at the company for a bunch of years, then they leave because they're convinced the grass is greener somewhere else, and then they come back. And, sometimes people, I think, have to do that because they can't really internalize, what it's going to be like to be, let's say, in a much larger organization, or in something where they're, trying to start their own business or whatever else. They think it seems like a great thing from the outside. When they're in it, it doesn't seem as great as when they were as it looked like before, so to speak. I tend to think that people, it's usually when people have built up a lot of experience and whatever in a particular area, they jump into another area and then they want to go back. It's usually not that difficult to go back. If you've had all kinds of, if you've got all kinds of very clear capability in the previous area, and you try, you say, well, for a year or two, I tried this weird thing. Well, I decided I didn't like it. I'm coming back to this previous thing. I think that's usually something that's not super difficult to do. Usually the problem is that people get locked into a stage of life. They go through school, they get all these loans, they get, they start having all sorts of responsibilities. They have mortgages, they have this and that and the other. They're in a particular direction, they're doing particular jobs. They get pretty good at that job, they get paid well in that job and so on. And then they say, I'd really like to do this thing over here, which doesn't pay nearly as well. But they've got all these responsibilities, which are kind of a big burden, and they're really pretty trapped. And then sometimes it ends up being, well, let me wait until I retire, and then I'll do these things. That very rarely works out well. I would say the much better strategy is to see whether there's some path. You say, this is where I want to get to. And then you say, well, is there some path? Let's say you're an engineer, but you really want to be doing teaching or something. And one thing pays this amount and the other pays 1/3 that amount. Well, maybe there's a way to kind of bring some teaching into the engineering that you're doing by doing something, on the side, or volunteering to be part of some training thing or whatever else. And that way you sort of gradually take the thing that was your mainstream activity, and you gradually sort of distort it in the direction that you want to go. And people will often think, it's the same thing as with designing software, actually. People will say, we've got this set up in our software. We want it to be like this, but that's over there, but that won't be compatible with what we've already done. My attitude towards that in terms of software design is figure out what you want. Then you'll discover a bridge to get to where you were, that gets there from where you were before. And I think the same thing is true with a bunch of career type stuff, that, figure out where you want to get to, really, figure out what it looks like when you get there, and then see if you can't find a bridge from where you are now to where you want to get to, rather than if you have the means to just jump right into the place where you want to get to, great. But if you don't, and if you are using, you have to make use of the situation that you're in right now, and you have responsibilities there or elsewhere driven by that and so on, then it's the question of define where you want to go and then see if you can get a bridge to get there.